Good morning. I am Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she, her. I am a middle-aged, middle-height, pale woman with gray pants and a gray and white plaid shirt on, with short, spiky salt and pepper hair. Before I start my message today, I want to hold space for a moment of silence for Nex Benedict, the non-binary 16-year-old who was beaten to death in their Oklahoma high school bathroom this week. May they rest in peace and power. When we ask why it matters so much that we work to honor people's pronouns and to create bathroom spaces that are safe for everyone, this is one of far too many answers. Likewise, history suggests that all over this country this week, people of color and other marginalized identities were profiled, discriminated against, followed, harassed, beaten, and killed, all because of who they are. This is an election year, which means that the horrible rhetoric will be ramped up and more people will act explicitly on the hatred and bigotry that may have once been implicit. We have a responsibility to create a different narrative, to challenge the lies and the violence, to help create a world that holds the counter narrative, one of love and grace and welcome and full inclusion, that if we work hard enough someday might not be the counter narrative, but it might be the meta narrative. May it be so. For that reason, some of what I say today will hit hard for some of us. And for others, it won't be nearly hard enough. I ask you to stay with me, to be open, to think about what is yours to do, because the lives of our beautiful fellow humans are literally at stake. On this last Sunday of Black History Month, maybe the best way to honor the Black history that has been is to help create a world where less, or preferably none, of future Black history is extraordinary humans having to use their gifts and charisma to say, please stop killing us. Last week I was in Louisville, or Lovell, if you're from there, for some meetings for a national campus ministry board that I'm on. And one of my colleagues in the meetings was a guy named Bill. Bill's from Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is one of the cool places in this country, like Portland or Austin or Denver, places where you might find more diversity than the surrounding areas, and queer, feminist, anarchist bookstores, like Firestorm. Bill shared a story about Firestorm that just made my day. There's also a great article in the February 10th Washington Post titled, "How Anarchists in North Carolina Rescued Banned Books from Florida." So in case you haven't heard the story yet, this is the gist of it. 22,000 children's books get either rejected upon delivery or pulled from shelves from a Florida school district in Duval County because they deal with racism, LGBTQ inclusion, and other justice themes that encourage critical engagement with our institutional structures. The Queer Feminist Anarchist Collective in Asheville, where they normally stock about 8,000 books, receives a request to take these 22,000 books that are all children's books, which they don't normally have a lot of, and, well, do something with them. Clearly they couldn't say no, so they received the rejected books and got to work to do something amazing with them, which was sending them out to anyone who requested them. Many of them headed right back into Florida, where people like Armand Rosamilia, an author and Duval County resident, have requested a box of the books to put in a little free library outside their homes. Firestorm wrote in their blog post, which you can see on the screen, describing their first packaging party. At our first Banned Books Back packaging party, community members turned out in droves to sort through dozens of cartons of books removed from Duval County Public Schools in Florida. Together, we prepped 642 chapter books and 936 picture books to return to young readers. Despite the chill in the air and the Christo-fascism in the political system, the mood was festive. Participants jumped in, swapping tips and innovating strategies to ensure that each box was lovingly assembled, filled with beautiful stories, and addressed to a child in Florida. This, my friends, is a joyful path to justice and equity, particularly when it takes place in states where people in state agencies and at public universities can no longer say equity, diversity, or inclusion. I'm looking at you, Missouri. But here's the thing about that. The people who find themselves in a position and with the reputation to receive such a request didn't just drop onto the scene out of nowhere. They've been doing deep, hard, self-reflective, agitational, constituent-led, community-based, countercultural work together for years, probably decades. You've often heard me quote Khalil Gibran saying that the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. I think that's also true of accountability and vulnerability. The deeper we allow these to dig around inside us and to rid ourselves of the biases that live deep, deep within, the more joy we can contain. And once we let go of the need to present ourselves to the world as having it all figured out, the need to show up and be that good liberal, that good progressive that already knows all the right things to do and say, or wanting to be perceived in a particular way, we can get honest with ourselves about the ways that we benefit from unjust systems and struggle to fight against them, even when we want to, and even when we're good people. It doesn't matter if the unjust system is racist, sexist, ageist, classist, heterosexist, ableist, elitist, transphobic, xenophobic. I can go on and on and on, but that covers a fair number of the isms that impact many of our daily lives. There are bubbles rising up out the windows in the back from the children, and it's beautiful. Speaking of children. No matter what the ism or phobia is that's pushing people out to the margins in any given community, it's likely that each and every one of us are big, complex piles of intersecting privileges and oppressions. And while we find it easy sometimes to talk about our oppressions, not so much when it comes to our privileges. And our participation, intentional or not, in unjust systems. The term for this is fragility. One of my intentional observances of Black History Month has been to present you with quotes primarily from Black, or at least non-white, authors and thinkers. But today I want to share with you a quote about fragility and Robin DiAngelo's work that would lead to her book, White Fragility, with a nod to those who are familiar with all the critiques of DiAngelo as a white academic profiting greatly from her anti-racism work. Even so, I think sometimes highly educated white folks need to hear something from highly educated white folks to finally be like, oh, I never thought of it that way before. So here goes. In a 2018 New Yorker article, Katie Waldman writes, academic and educator Robin DiAngelo has noticed that white people are sensationally, histrionically bad at discussing racism. Like waves on sand, their reactions form predictable patterns. They will insist that they were taught to treat everyone the same, that they are colorblind, that they don't care if you're pink, purple, or polka dotted. They will point to friends and family members of color, a history of civil rights activism, and a more salient issue such as class or gender. They will shout and bluster. They will cry. In 2011, D'Angelo coined the term white fragility to describe the disbelieving defensiveness that white people exhibit when their ideas about race and racism are challenged, and particularly when they feel implicated in white supremacy. Why, she wondered, did her feedback prompt such resistance, as if the mention of racism were more offensive than the fact or practice of it? A part of the reason that any privileged group expresses fragility when confronted with the lived experience of their oppressed counterparts is that guilt or shame or fear is in the driver's seat, and joy is nowhere to be found unless it's bound up and hidden in the trunk. Just to finish out that questionably placed car metaphor. But what if joy is an antidote to fragility? What will it take for us to find joy in the work of justice and equity? How can we face hard truths without being consumed by fear and shame? It takes a willingness to do deeply personal, deeply spiritual work in community. Adrienne Marie Brown says in an interview with Caitlin Breedlove on the Fortification podcast that we must build up our tolerance for being able to be with each other. And we need to be building up our spiritual practice to reground, recenter, and find a way for that energy to move. Friends, there is something inherently joyful about engaging in meaning making together. It's why we come here week after week. In terms of our UU principles, one might say that to covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning is to do just that. In terms of the values in our proposed Article 2 revision, we can find it in our stated value transformation, which will be the subject of all of our March Sunday services. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. The Article 2 Commission wrote, as James Luther Adams has said, a living tradition is not bequeathed through some law of inheritance, it must be earned, not without dust and heat, and not without humbling grace. But there's good news. The good news is that joy is possible in all the dust and heat and in the midst of all of our practice of humbling grace. Joy in the exploration of diverse worldviews. Joy in the engagement with people who are different from us. Joy in the gathering that goes with being community together and shared meals and shared games and shared music and advocacy and worship. Joy in the songs that we sing together, the prayers and meditations that sustain us, the poems we recite, the collective art we endeavor to create. Joy in embracing the idea that, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Joy in dismantling unjust systems that hold us all in bondage, whether we are the beneficiaries or those on the receiving end of the injustice. Joy in kicking fear and shame to the curb and trusting that we are held by community as we learn to lean into something different. Joy in breaking generational cycles of dysfunction. There is a joyful path to be taken in this work, friends. In fact, there are so many possible joyful paths that it's like a live action game of Candyland. In an interview with Laura Flanders on The Nation, Ibram X. Kendi was asked, "What's at stake?" And Kendi answered, "What's at stake is joy." At the end of the day, one of the net effects of racism, and I would add all the isms and phobias, aside from people literally losing their lives, is misery, The inverse to that is creating a joyful life, one where people can enjoy their lives and no matter race or other characteristic or identity can grow. So let me close with this. One of the most joyful things we can do sometimes is sing. And one of the most joyful songs we can sing is one that most of us probably learned as a child, "This Little Light of Mine." It's a traditional African-American spiritual and was used powerfully in the civil rights movement to lift up courage and joy in the face of unspeakable violence. It continues to hold that kind of power. We all remember that horrific Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017, where a white nationalist drove a car into a group of protesters. But something else happened that day too. In the words of Reverend Osagyefo Sekou, a recording artist, author, and theologian, an activist who helped train volunteers for that counter-protest, he said, "We had originally said we were going to stand silently, but the Nazis were marching past us in these various battalions, cursing and yelling mostly homophobic slurs at us. And you could feel the energy of the people who worked with us, the people that we hadn't trained, and they were getting amped up." Sekou says he knew in that moment that he had to change the atmosphere. I know a song can do that. So I just broke into "This Little Light of Mine." In a moment captured on video, the clergy and volunteers who sang, a group that included the famed academic and activist Cornel West, are shown standing in line, their voices rising over the chants of "You will not replace us" from the rally crowd. The tensions went down and it shook the Nazis, Sekou says. They didn't know what to do with all that joy. We weren't going to let the darkness have the last word. And friends, that's what joy does. It displaces hate and fear and shame so that we can get down to the business of transformation and liberation.